what you should see is a presentation with an introduction slide. Can I get a confirmation?
Yep, we can see it, Ernesto.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mindy. Okay, so let's talk about remote coaching. But before we do that, just going to provide some information on how to connect with us. I am the founder and president of Agile Genesis. We have several social media channels and ways to connect with us. These are the ones. I have my own LinkedIn account here, which is direct, and I'm pretty active in it. So if you have questions and if you want to touch base, feel free to reach out by any of these social media channels. And if you're interested in our classes, of course, feel free to visit agilegenesis.com, where we have classes on schedule, on scaling Agile, and opportunities for coaching engagements for different organization and transformational goals. Right? That's it for that shameless self-promotion. Let's move into some of the topic areas that we're here to discuss. So today we're going to talk about coaching. And before we do that, I want to establish some common definitions, right? I've modified these to fit our discussion. So for today, these will be our definition. When we talk about coaching, we're talking about seeking performance improvement from team members, from individuals, and from the team as well. Training is more about imparting knowledge, seeking for individuals to understand certain material and certain topics, right? So coaching about performance, about being active on the job, inspecting and adapting, if you will, right? So with that, and knowing the difference between those, let's talk about distributed teams and what we mean when we talk about distributed Agile. Distributed Agile are for those individuals that aren't familiar with the term. If you are connecting from anywhere outside a co-located office space, you are part of a distributed team. If you are practicing Agile in the way of Scrum or Kanban or any other type of implementation, you are part of a distributed Agile team. The Agile team members in a distributed environment tend to have challenges in specific areas as per some of the studies that I've conducted, and they are in 5 areas that start with tools. Tools is one of the main areas that individual Agile team members are challenged by. That is the technology necessary to collaborate effectively among the Agile teams and among the organization. It's one of the top challenges. The other is the role and the clarity around the responsibility of the individuals and the new responsibilities that come with some of the ways of working in a distributed environment, right? The third one are the events, the logistics, the facilitation. How do we do this effectively? Things like time zone get in the way, among other logistics consideration. Artifacts. How do we visually radiate the information when they are hitting in a digital in the digital desktop, for example, right? Or how do we make sure that we're seeing the same thing if we are basing it on reports that might be coming from a digital tool? So the keeping of those artifacts, the maintenance of those artifacts becomes an additional consideration. And lastly, the techniques. How do we improve the collaboration between the team members in such a way that allows for that facilitation and that whiteboarding and ideation and all those things that we used to do in the office to work effectively in a distributed environment? As coaches, it is important that we are able to first articulate what these challenges are and recognize that they are new challenges in a distributed environment. And for us ourselves as coaches, there are particular challenges that we're going to talk about. So I wanted to kind of get a quick idea in terms of what might be some of the challenges that you are facing as a coach when you are engaging teams in a remote setting. And Mindy was kind enough to put that out, and I believe that is already in progress. We have a poll going. Please let us know so that we could also get your perspective. Okay. And I'll pause there for a second and encourage you to fill out the poll, because I'm going to give you some of the observations that we've seen. So that might skew some of the things that you will include in that poll. So go ahead and fill out that poll, and I'll switch to the next slide with the hopes that you've already had the opportunity to offer your thoughts. So some of the remote coaching challenges that we observe, and some of the more common ones, funny enough, they're similar to the ones that team members face. The technology it's a big one. The idea that it's a slow process for us coaches to be onboarded into an organization, and for us to identify all of the necessary tools and start to use some of those tools. It's a challenge. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about each of these in separate topics of the session today. Accountability, the team members and the stakeholders' participation, their communication, and their level of trust. It's harder to capture and obtain and grow in a distributed setting as coaches. The logistics is also there, right? The conflicting meetings, absent members, what do we do when we can't get in touch with someone? A lot of times we don't even know where some of the meetings are happening or how they're happening, right? So orienting to those things becomes a challenge as well. And lastly is the concept of knowledge, probably also awareness, right? But then the acronym wouldn't have been as neat, right? The idea that we tend to have low visibility into some of the organization key activities, some of the key members, and any of the other aspects that we tend to pick up by osmosis as we walk the floor in a physical location, right? What's the company culture like? Who are the individuals that are those silent leaders are more difficult to identify in a remote setting, right? So again, highlighting the difference, because when we are coaching in a physical environment, we tend to have some of our own techniques that we developed over time, and we can walk in and sort of see where the people are gathered and slowly get into conversations that allow us to gather more information. Someone much smarter than me once said that remoteness simply highlights some of the inefficiencies that we've had for a long time, right? So the idea that be more methodical about the process that we follow to coach our clients, to coach our teams, to coach the leadership is necessary in a remote environment, so that those inefficiencies aren't amplified by the fact that we can't do it ad hoc as much or at all, right? Mindy, I have my presentation mode here, and I'm not following the chat, so feel free to jump in and ask questions if the chat calls for that. So I'm happy to pause at any point and take questions if there are any. Okay.
Of course, I'm watching this one and our LinkedIn Live, so I will.
Very good. Thank you. So the first one is the idea of technology being a challenge for us as coaches. I'll tell you that I've had engagements where it's taking me up to 2 weeks to get access to the internal company email, right? As a coach, and that means that I don't have access to calendar. How many of you have had the experience where you're going into an engagement if you're a consulting coach? And you don't know when people are available for the first few weeks because you don't have access to schedules, and vice versa. Now you're getting meeting invites into items that are conflicting with other things that you've already had in your schedule. So onboarding to these tools is a first order of business when it comes to coaching remotely. In the past, people could ask us that as we walked the hallway, or we were in that introduction physical meeting. In a remote setting, we depend on these meetings for those kinds of conversations. So these are the tools that are most commonly used by Agile teams. And you want to make sure that you sweep you are onboarded as soon as possible into the full gamut of the tools that the teams use, right? That includes Jira or MS, ADO, Azure DevOps, if that's what they're using. That means getting access to Zoom accounts if you're going to be using the one in the organization. Confluence pages, which usually comes with Jira if that's what they're using, or SharePoint. I'm not going to go through these all, but I think you get the idea. It's pivotal that the first order of business is requesting access to these tools. Don't wait until you're in there and ready to hit the road to realize that it's going to take you a couple of weeks to start that process, right? From the other perspective, technology-wise, as coaches, it's becoming more and more necessary for us to be part technology advisors to the elements necessary to have effective remote collaboration. There was a time when we had the luxury of being tool agnostic, where we teach and coach around the values and principles, but more and more and more and more, I am being asked, what are the right tools to use? What's the right composition for those tools? How do we use these tools? What if we have multiple tools, and comparing those? And I'm being drawn into those conversations, not only by the individual team members and the teams, but also by the leadership, by the directors, by the VPs. Tools are important in a remote setting. So the conversation is happening more often. We can't stand by anymore and hope that the organization figures it out. As coaches, it's our responsibility to offer some thoughts and some observations from prior experience and practices that we can offer. So with that, setting the stage, recognize that not all tools are built the same. This is not mine. This comes from Business Insider, where they compared the bandwidth requirement for the different desktop tools. It's just an example of the different considerations. If you have an international team in some parts of the world where bandwidth is not as abundant as it might be in your local area, this is an important consideration. So if the organization is not using the right tool, as coaches, we can help with that. Another area is in the composition of the project management tools, such as Jira or Azure DevOps. More and more and more, I'm having conversations about the tool structure, the actual product backlog decomposition structure, and the teams and how they're sharing those. Jira forces a different composition than Azure DevOps does, for example. Not that one is wrong or better than the other. It's just we need to consider the tools in our backlog management now more so than we did in the past, because we've been in engagements where that was done physically by way of stickies. Today, that seems like a distant world, and it was just a few years ago when that was more the standard way of capturing our information. So today, the tools are a center part of how the teams are managing their backlog, and it's important for us as coaches to coach around the difference between those, the advantages and disadvantages, right? In a technology group of challenges, there are subtopics that can help us to orient in how we can maneuver, or we can outpace some of the challenges that we see, right? The first is the idea of the need for governance when it comes to tools. The corporate security compliance is a big consideration. Do not ignore that as you choose your tools, or as you yourself are using the tools of the organization. The tools are dependent on the features that the teams need. So make sure that the tools that are selected fit the needs of the team. As coaches, we want to have that conversation and make sure that there aren't significant gaps in what the team wants to do versus what the tool can do. And the information overload, the idea that we might have too many tools, and it's time to curve that back and have some single source of truths, if you will, in a way that doesn't confuse the teams. That's a lot. That's quite the list, right? We didn't have to do that in the past. Today, that's a standard form of working. These are standard considerations that we need to have. And in doing so, one technique that works is establishing a tool advisory board. This is a group of individuals. The name might sound larger than it is. This is a tool of individuals whose responsibility is to have proper governance around the tools, to have the necessary standards, the necessary inspection, the necessary implementation, right? As it pertains to the Agile teams. How is this different from IT support or the
Ernesto,
internal? Yeah.
I am getting asked, are the slides going to be made available?
Yes, we will do that in a cool way. I'll put
Yeah,
those.
I figured you'll email them to me and I can email them to, I'll drop my email and everybody can email me and let me know if they want them and I'll email them to them. Yep. Okay. Thank you. I figured as much. All right.
We will do that. And I think in real time, we can do a quick exercise here where I can drop them in Miro and also provide that link to individuals.
All right. Great. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. From a training perspective, we want to make sure that we increase the efficacy of the use of the tools. We coach around how well can the teams understand the use of the tools and the intended use for those. Maybe it has to do with the respective dashboards, so how we handling the actual product backlog items. We want consistency around that. We don't want one-off adoption of that. We want the teams on board. A neat way for that to happen organically is to establish a community of practice that cements those throughout the organization. So as coaches, we find ways to instill these and make them part of the organization and their DNA, and the community of practice is a good way of doing that. So offering that as a technique for your toolbox. And lastly is the need for support. The lack of access. How many of you have been locked out and can't access the tool, and that creates significant productivity impact? Unable to find the right information because, well, it's in a Confluence page here, but it's in an Excel there, or it's in an external third-party tool. And technical problems that we might have, whether they are in the area of not being able to access a particular board in Jira, if we're using that, or in Azure DevOps and DevOps pipeline, maybe. We need individuals that understand the tools at the team level. To open a case with IT, in order for me to request access to a specific board in Jira, it's simply going to take longer to understand what I'm asking for than it is for me to have an internal person empowered and enabled to do that. So identifying a tool administrator, a TA, is a great technique for us to keep the teams productive and remove some of the impediments that they face. Okay. All right. I see number 2 there on the chat. I'm not going to pull that up in the interest of time, trusting that Mindy is going to keep me honest. And if it's something that needs to be addressed, let me know.
Okay? It's just stuff that I have posted, so you're good.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mindy. All right. I am in the East Coast in Florida, and the sun is setting. So it's going to start to get a little darker. I'm going to have to adjust my camera. At some point, it's going to look like I'm in the witness protection program. So I'll give you some light in a bit. I think for now, the camera is still good, right? All right. Remote coaching challenges. One of the things is the accountability, the ownership that individuals have to what we are coaching around. They tend to have low participation, low communication, and with that comes a low level of trust among the team members. But also, if we are new, if we're coaches, they're not seeing us on a regular basis, we're not interacting regularly, we take a hit on that trust level. So one of the things that influences that is the Allen curve, which shows that distance significantly impacts the frequency of communication. I mean, as much as meters impacts it. Imagine what it does when we are in a distributed environment by miles or sometimes in different countries, right? So the frequency of communication goes significantly lower. Luckily, there are techniques that we can use to improve that. One of those is building trust with face-to-face communication. Face-to-face, right? The Agile Manifesto says that the best form of communication is face-to-face. We might not be physically in the same room, but if we turn on video, we are getting closer to face-to-face, right? Not disagreeing that the best form of communication is in a physical room with two individuals or more, but we can improve our distant communication with face-to-face video. And this study shows a good amount of the benefit that you get from that. This is Olsen 2014 that shows how a set of teams improved their trust level, their information richness, their authenticity, reduce their stress, and ultimately increase the effectiveness of the team as they shared videos in their meetings. So as coaches, if you are not coaching around sharing video, or if you're in an organization that is adverse to that, I highly encourage you to encourage teams to do that and create and turn that culture into one that is friendly to video sharing. It goes a long way when it comes to creating trust. Right? I mentioned that nothing beats face-to-face. So in a distributed environment where we are remote, if we have the opportunity, we want to practice SVG. SVG is the idea of seating, where we go physically to where most of the team members are, and we work together for a short period of time, maybe one sprint if we're doing Scrum. We then go back to our remote environments, and the social capital that we build over that period of time pays dividend over a long period of time. And then we come back on a periodic basis, which is what we call visiting. That's the V in SVG, where we pay small visits and continue that social capital growth. And we go back to our natural habitat. And then once a year, twice a year, we practice gathering, where we get the whole team together and have some team building. And again, getting that trust to increase by getting together physically and socially as well. So SVG, if you have the ability to get the team together, for you to get on a plane and physically visit the team, or maybe get on the commute for the seating period, it will go a long way to building that trust while allowing you to come back and be remote and benefit from it long term. Okay. So from a summary perspective of some of the subtopics that we tend to see in the accountability challenge, we see lack of clarity. Some team members tend to have overlapping roles. They might be confused about what role they're playing or who is playing that role. And they might just simply be missing roles, period. And that can be very, very disoriented and lower the communication and the participation. So one technique for that is to do a team RASI. Don't do it to the team, do it with the team. So have an exercise where you would put up the roles and responsibilities that pertain to that Agile team, and have them identify the respective owners of the different responsibilities. It's actually a very interesting exercise, because what we tend to see is that what we assumed is not necessarily always true to what the team thought or is practicing. So having a RASI, you might get a little pushback there from the Agile community when it comes to RASIs and Agile. I personally don't see a problem with clarifying some of the roles and responsibilities and who is in those positions, as long as we are staying true to the Agile principles and values, and making sure that we are aligning with the needs of the team and the organization. Okay. Trust. So we talked about low cohesion, sub-team formation, slow decision making. These are the things that tend to manifest in when we have a low trust environment. So practice SGV and try to encourage teams to share video. 2 quick techniques there. Collaboration, low collaboration when it comes to accountability. The idea that time zone misalignment, the idea that infrequent communication is a problem. We can improve some of these with things like a team working agreement, a TWA. We can improve this with a Scrum of Scrum implementation, right? So let's look a little bit there and understand what I mean by those items, right? So when we talk about a Scrum of Scrums, we're talking about the idea that you can have a group of Scrum teams come together at a particular time of their region that is friendly to that area. You can have another group of teams, meaning a Scrum of Scrums, that is happening in another part of the world at a different time that is friendly to them. And then the Scrum of Scrums is this concept of the teams coming together with representatives from these individuals and these individuals at a time that is neutral to them. And it allows them to have participation in such a way that no one is really taking a big burden when it comes to their time zone. So it allows for this to happen on a more periodic basis. In a remote setting, a daily scale daily Scrum is a big benefit. This is one of the practices that is in the Scrum at Scale framework, where the teams meet on a daily basis, not just for their, what we sometimes call the daily stand-up, or more properly called the daily Scrum, but they also come together during the Scale daily Scrum. That is the Scrum of Scrums meeting once a day for 15 minutes to align on those elements important to the teams. If you do it in such a way that is a 15-minute meeting for any one of these individuals, it could happen on a daily basis, allowing for that frequency of communication to increase. Okay. Logistics tend to be some of the more frequent questions that I get. How do we deal with difficult schedulings, and the fact that we have longer events, the fact that we have unclear meeting logistics, time zones, things of that nature. Here are a few bullets to help with that. Choosing time zone friendly hours so we can all share the pain is it's expected at this point. Schedule the events on cadence and make sure that they are scheduled ahead. I should know where we're going to be meeting or how we're going to be meeting for our next sprint planning session, and maybe even the next one after that, right? So give me the opportunity to be able to plan my schedule by giving me head notice. The Scrum per region, we cover that. And consolidating events. A lot of teams are starting to consolidate some of their events so that things like the sprint review, for example, it's happening immediately before they have their Scrum of Scrum. So now that we are together, the retrospective, now that we are together, those individuals that are going to be taking part in the retrospective, please stay in the virtual room and let's go right into the next session to maximize everybody's attendance in such a way that reduces the burden of reattendance, right? Just keep an eye on the longevity of the meeting. It is intended to reduce time, not to increase it, right? And of course, share the details ahead. we as coaches have grown a little comfortable with everybody understanding what these events are for. And sometimes individuals don't quite always know what that is, especially during the sprint review, for example, if we have stakeholders attending. So send the information ahead, encourage individuals to share a customized agenda for the different events. Of course, you won't do that for the daily Scrum, but wherever it makes sense, try to share the information ahead in such a way that gives the team an understanding on what we will be discussing during the specific meetings that might be ahead, okay? Other aspects on the logistics side that are important. Make sure that we are posting a time box agenda and that we're keeping that time box during the events. Nothing more discouraging than having individual team members expect to be in a meeting for 30 minutes and it's an hour and a half later, and those and we're still having a discussion. So as a coach, make sure that you are coaching the individuals, in particular the Scrum Masters, if you are in a Scrum environment, to keeping the time box in such a way that allows us to have the events as planned without false expectations there, okay? On the knowledge side, on the lack of visibility challenge, if you are coaching for remote teams that also have physical environments, in other words, you have a hybrid team or hybrid organization, it's a little tougher to do. I'll tell you that one of the things that we discovered during COVID was that the idea that everyone was remote actually made it work well. When we started to go back into the office and we're having more hybrid environments, where it's starting to come up against the difficulties that make remote Agile team collaboration difficult. So as coaches, we want to coach for remote equality. We want to coach around the idea that individuals that are remote should have the same visibility as individuals that are in the office. And that means setting up an office environment, if there's a physical environment that has digital assets. That means that we're offering the opportunity for individuals in the physical environment to interact with that digital environment. That means having a dedicated tool administrator that can help remote and local individuals for those digital settings. And that means that we have information radiators throughout the office and in the digital environment as well that are synchronizing. These were not challenges that we had before. It is imperative that we are now practicing equal access to these artifacts for members that are remote as well as for members that are local or co-located. Okay. The last part on the challenges aspect is the idea that those artifacts, those things that go beyond the Agile artifacts, right, or the Scrum artifacts, are actually accessible to us as coaches. How many times do we go into an organization not understanding the organization chart or the org chart? The team composition, who's who in the teams, or how are those teams organized?
Hi, Ernesto, we have a question.
Yeah.
What does it mean to job team? Can you clarify?
Say that again.
What does it mean to job team? Can you clarify?
Job team. I don't understand that. Do I have a typo? Maybe that's a typo.
I might be meant for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be meant for me. Never mind.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's on our LinkedIn Live. I'm looking at it now. Yep.
Sounds good. Let me know if it comes up as a question that I can help with. Okay. The lack of visibility that we have as coaches, it's a real problem if we don't prepare for it. What I mean by that, we tend to go into organizations sometimes blind. Why? Because it was easy to do in a time when we could walk the hallway. We can actually go into these organizations and understand the structure and understand the players and understand the meetings that were taking place if we were in a physical location. In a digital environment, we need to be more methodical, as I said at the beginning of this session. We need to really get behind the idea that as we are entering an organization, we should try to gather as much information ahead of time in a structured way. The artifacts that I myself orient around, I want to understand the organization. I want to understand the team composition. I want to understand when the teams are meeting. And by the way, if you get a non-applicable for some of those teams, that's okay too. But at least now we know what we didn't know before, right? You want to identify any peripheral key stakeholders. Is there a PMO? Who are the individuals in the support organization and that might be feeding requirements into the product team? Things of this nature are very important, and they used to happen by us simply being around and someone tapping us in the shoulder. That's not happening in a remote environment. And are there any additional artifacts? Some teams have style guides. They should have a definition of done. Is there an organizational definition of done? All questions that you should be asking as a remote coach to make sure that you have a library that allows you to get visibility into the things that are important to coach around and for you to insert yourself into the conversations that are relevant for the organization and the transformation. Okay. With that, so we've covered the 4 challenges, and I am going to also add a quick view that is not so much specific to remote coaching, but because we also talked about models, I wanted to be fair to some of those transformation models and frameworks that you might be familiar with or may not. So adding here the approaches at Agile Genesis, we follow the 8 steps of process for leading change by John Carter that you might be familiar with, things like creating a sense of urgency, which is for us defining the problem, what are the things that we're trying to solve, and then creating the coalition. That means identifying the individuals that are going to be a part of that transformation and help us by being an active member and owning a part of that responsibility, creating a vision and communicating that out, and then empowering the teams and having actual small implementations that we use as the example to amplify the benefits throughout the organization as we scale the implementation, what Carter calls the quick wins. And then building on that change so that we inspect and adapt and we make it stick with things like communities of practice and ensuring that the leadership and other individuals are active participants once we are exiting that organization, right? So our job is to put ourselves out of work as soon as possible in such a way that the organization becomes self-sufficient. And so that's the Carter model that we follow. Scrum at Scale has a transformation roadmap as well that includes going to see the problem and all the way including training and also having the formation of the executive action team and the executive meta scrum, among other teams. And many of you might be familiar with the SAFE transformation roadmap, which essentially is around the idea of engaging in various training aspects, identifying the value streams, and essentially forming the art and repeating that with the help of an SPC in such a way that continues to grow throughout the organization in the form of ARTs or Agile release trains. Okay, so offering these, I know these are not specific to remote engagements, but wanted to also match some of what we just discussed and give you a little bonus, if you will, here on some of the transformation approaches that are most common. Okay. Okay, and with that, are there any questions, comments, concerns? All right. I know that there was a question about the class material, and we do have a few extra minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Miro, and the reason, and I thought this would be a good way to make these available because, well, this promotes the idea of facilitating remote coaching and also facilitation, right? I'm going to create a new board in Miro, and I am going to call this board and I wanted to do this in real time in such a way so that you see how this comes together. And there's an unnamed board in Miro. I'm going to call this distributed team coaching. Actually, it has a different meaning if we say coaching distributed teams. And that is our board. And I'm going to go into our slide deck here, which I'll also share with Mindy via email, and that will allow her to get it to folks that aren't able to access Miro. And I'm going to, okay, coming here. And going to, okay, here we are. And I'm going to drop this right here. That's coming. Of course, it's making me look bad in real time. I think it's because I have it open. Ha ha ha. And it's uploaded to Miro. I promise you, I make no commission on Miro. It is a great whiteboarding tool, however, that I use a lot for coaching engagements and for being able to do that in a remote setting. It is sort of the replacement of the old whiteboard. So that's up there now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the pages, and I'm going to extract all the pages. And now it is showing you an actual set of all of the slides that I presented. Okay, that takes a minute, and there it is. Now you have the full presentation available to you in Miro. I'm going to share, and you are going to have this. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put it on the chat. So Mindy, you have that available there, and can also promote that with the rest of the follow-up information. Okay, so this Miro board will be open for an extended period past 30 days. You can come in at any point and get that information. It does allow you to zoom in and see all of the details for the material that we just covered. Okay. All right, with that, Are there any additional questions?
Feel free to unmute and ask your questions if you would like.
All right. If there aren't any, I am happy to give back the gift of time. You do have my contact information. Feel free to connect and reach out. Yeah.
David, no, you do not need a password.
You do not. Thank you, Mindy.
Yes.
So for
I knew the answer to that one. So
yeah, Mindy's familiar with some of my facilitation techniques. So
yep.
thank you, Mindy.
I knew the answer to that one.
That works.
I have one question.
Of course.
In your studies and sort of expertise, how do you deal with teams that have a influx of new team members coming on, especially new dev leads, new product owners, kind of like a lot when the scaling goes on? Is there different strategies that take place that you would advise?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a common problem, by the way. You're not alone if you're facing that, Ashok. One of the considerations are these individual team members that are coming on miscellaneous, or is there a large group now that is not properly trained? So if the answer is that it's a large group, I would recommend that those new team members go through the similar training that the first group of team members went through, so that their knowledge is similar, and then we insert them into the existing team. So what we do is, one of the techniques that I like to practice is this idea of splitting the teams in order to grow the implementation. So we split the team and we put the new team members into those second half of the teams. Why that mitosis? Because by doing that, we are now allowing two separate teams to have similar good habits than a new team who has to discover those new habits over a period of time, right? So mitosis is a good way of cross-pollinating those good habits and make sure that those new team members are also going through the same training. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
Sure
much.
thing.
All right. Are there any more questions? All right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm curious. How do you deal with the situations when there is a combination of remote and on-site, and you know, what if this is a pattern? How would you recommend to management or maybe coaches to deal with the situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very clear and present challenge, right? The idea that doing having every member remote actually makes the implementation smoother than when we are in a hybrid environment. Part of the team is physical, the other part is remote. Is aggravated by the lack of equality in the remote team consideration. What do I mean by that? If we're in a conference call and we happen to be in a conference room, I'm going to address Mindy directly and possibly ignore what's on the screen up there. It's just a natural preference that we have as individuals, right? To address those that are physical or are making eye contact. So what's important is that we bring those individuals in as much as possible in order for them to feel included in that conversation. As far as the leadership coaching the leaderships around, it's a perfect opportunity to bring the SVG conversation, the seating, visiting, and gathering as an opportunity to bring everyone together. That takes investment so that we can continue to build that social capital for those individuals that are remote.
I do have a question from our live too. Would you pepper them to shadow other seasoned teams?
I'm sorry, Mindy, I got caught. I was telling Alexa to turn on the light and
Nope.
did not hear that. Say that again.
Would you pepper them to shadow other seasoned teams?
Yes, that's actually the idea of the mitosis technique for growing the teams, right? As new individuals come in, we want to put them in already high functioning teams so that they pick up those habits and are going to become just as high functioning as those individuals in the team. It's another way of saying shadowing individuals, right? But we don't get them to have a light shadowing. We want them embedded in the team and be accountable and responsible so that they continue to adopt and assimilate those practices in a better way. Shadowing, nothing wrong with it. It's a great practice. Better than shadowing, mitosis, right?
We have another question. How would you recommend to report development progress when the report of the organization is not agile?
Yeah, I've had that challenge quite a lot in organizations, right? And sometimes I'm meeting them in the middle, right? Having conversations about what they can be comfortable with and coaching them around being a little flexible and feeling a little uncomfortable about self-service information, right? Understanding what their purpose for that information might be sometimes leads to some common solutions. One example is the PMO, right? The project management office. They tend to consume information in a very structured manner that takes time to put together. Not in all organizations, but sometimes that's a challenge. And creating a translation layer, what we have teamed up as coaches and have created this concept of, hey, if you're looking for this information, it could be found in this format here. Does that provide you with it? So there's a translation between how they're used to getting that in a formatted PowerPoint manner and how they're now able to get that in a JIRA form that still gives them the same information. And we as coaches are the midpoint that allows for that connection to happen so that they can self-service in the future. Yeah.
And then another question, should I offer a high-level agile training to my stakeholders?
Whenever you ask me a question about training individuals, the answer is always going to be yes. The more educated individuals are, the higher levels of agility that they will eventually exhibit. So yes, 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 if you can train those individuals, if you can get their time, it doesn't have to be certified training. It doesn't have to be long 2 days or 1 week training. Any form of training that can impart knowledge that allows these individuals to exhibit a more agile mindset and values is going to be beneficial to any transformation in any organization.
Next question, does all teams in the Scale Agile needs to have the same methodology such Scrum?
That's a great question. And that's a matter of preference, I would think. There are opinions around that, right? A framework like SAFe says no, right? You can have Kanban teams, you can have Scrum teams. If you're implementing Scrum at scale, it's going to be hard to scale Scrum if you're not doing Scrum. Right. So that depends on the situation. I find that when you have teams using different practices, the level of complexity increases significantly. To make my life easier and for selfish reasons as a coach, I coach around standard practices with a single use of a framework at the team level.
And it looks like that is all of our questions.
Oh, I have one last question.
No, go right ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask, with the collaboration aspect, how do you sort of deal with, having a split team that's onshore and offshore, but the offshore part has limited access to, either the work that we do or certain environments? So how do we kind of blend that together when we can't get them the access required to be looking at the same thing? Or, is there any way to work around that?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure on the specific logistics if it has to do with legal or policy. If it has to do with time zone and other factors, and in fact, in all cases, finding the common individuals or time zones will significantly help with that. So depending on the size of that implementation, the Scrum technique is a great one to allow you to have these regional teams that are then represented in a Scrum of Scrum virtual team that comes together on a periodic basis, preferably daily. If you're able to do that, what you have is actually representation from those teams on an active basis and collaboration that is happening as part of the Scrum of Scrums. And you can organize them in different parts of the world in such a way that you have a neutral time zone for the Scrum of Scrums.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome.
And then we have another question. What would you advise when you have all groups in one team in a different location versus dev team, Q&A team, and the functional team, especially in terms of daily Scrum and other joint ceremonies?
So if I understand that, you have team compositions where the teams are maybe co-located by or regionally located by their discipline, right? So you might have testers in one area, maybe in Asia, and you might have developers in RTP, North Carolina. How those individuals are structured matters, because if you're going to have, for example, a regional Scrum of Scrums, you need those teams to be cross-functional. So at the point where you have a single team with individuals that are spread all around the globe, you have no choice but to get them together on a periodic basis, and somebody's going to feel the pain of that, right, from a time zone perspective. So I would advise on trying to look at the team structure from not having teams that are siloed around their team members that are siloed around their functions, but rather create cross-functional teams by the respective regions that allow them to collaborate on a periodic basis. If you cannot, and the reality is that you have a globally distributed team, you've got a set of challenges that are addressed by some of the techniques that we covered today and the distributed team practices that we cover in the Agile distributed team collaboration class. So I don't leave you up in the air. I am going to provide one technique, and that could be in the area of how you are structuring your events in such a way that allows for the time compression to happen when the teams meet. Is a significant benefit for those teams, right? So having the information posted ahead and compressing the discussion time as it needs to be for individuals that are going to be very, very late their time to have a productive meeting. Sorry, that was a lengthy answer, but a complex question.